My parents refused to take in my newborn after my car accident. Then Grandpa walked in. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. The rain hammered against Nora Ellis's windshield so hard that the road ahead looked like a blur of gray shadows and flashing lights. At 28 years old, she had never felt so certain that something was terribly wrong. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel as she drove through the stormy Ohio night, heading toward a meeting she knew could change everything. For weeks, she had been digging into suspicious financial records connected to her fiancé Ryan Holt's business partner. The deeper she looked, the more questions she uncovered. Her heart raced as she replayed the evidence in her mind. She needed answers and she intended to get them. Then disaster struck. When traffic slowed near a sharp curve, Nora pressed the brake pedal. Nothing happened. A wave of panic shot through her body. She pumped the brakes again and again, but the pedal sank uselessly to the floor. The car sped forward uncontrollably. Her breath caught in her throat as headlights flashed past her window. She gripped the wheel desperately, trying to avoid other vehicles. The guardrail appeared seconds later. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. Everything went black. When Nora finally opened her eyes, the world felt distant and unfamiliar. Bright hospital lights hung above her. Every part of her body ached. Thick bandages wrapped her shoulder and ribs. Machines beeped steadily beside her bed. A nurse gently explained that several days had passed since the crash. Then came the news that left her speechless. During emergency treatment, doctors had delivered her baby prematurely. Her daughter had survived. Tiny Lily was resting safely in the neonatal unit. Tears streamed down Nora's face as relief and fear collided inside her. She desperately wanted to hold her child, but her injuries made even sitting upright difficult. Ryan visited often, yet something felt different. He seemed distracted, avoiding eye contact and offering vague answers whenever she mentioned the accident. His nervous behavior left an uneasy feeling in her stomach. With nowhere else to turn, Nora called her parents. Fighting back tears, she begged Grant and Diane Ellis to take Lily home temporarily while she recovered from surgery and learned to walk again. The response was colder than she could have imagined. They said they were too old to raise a baby. They said Lily wasn't their responsibility. Then they ended the conversation. As silence filled the hospital room, Nora stared at the wall in disbelief. Broken, exhausted, and terrified for her newborn daughter, she realized that the people she had counted on most had abandoned her when she needed them most. Still struggling to recover from the crash, Nora spent her days surrounded by hospital walls and unanswered questions. Her body was healing slowly, but her mind refused to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the terrifying moment when the brake pedal failed beneath her foot. The memory felt too sharp, too deliberate to be dismissed as bad luck. A few days later, a hospital investigator and local police officer arrived to ask routine questions about the accident. Nora expected a brief conversation, but their expressions quickly made her uneasy. They explained that an initial inspection of her vehicle had uncovered signs that concerned them. The brake lines appeared to have been damaged before the crash. While the investigation was still ongoing, they could not rule out intentional tampering. The words echoed in her mind long after they left. Someone may have wanted the accident to happen. When Ryan arrived that evening, Nora immediately told him what the investigators had said. Instead of reacting with shock or anger, he seemed strangely uncomfortable. He dismissed the findings almost instantly, insisting there had to be another explanation. According to him, older vehicles developed problems all the time, and she should focus on recovering instead of creating stress for herself. His response bothered her. Ryan normally had an opinion about everything, yet now he seemed eager to avoid the topic altogether. Whenever she tried to discuss it further, he redirected the conversation or found an excuse to leave. As Nora lay awake that night, another memory surfaced. Before the accident, she had planned to confront one of Ryan's business associates about financial irregularities she had discovered while reviewing company records. Several transactions made no sense, and large amounts of money appeared to be moving through accounts without clear explanations. At the time, she had assumed it was simple misconduct. Now she wondered if it connected to something far bigger. The next afternoon, her parents finally visited the hospital. For a brief moment, Nora hoped they had come to apologize for refusing to help with Lily. Instead, they entered carrying folders and paperwork. They barely asked about her condition. They barely mentioned their granddaughter. Instead, Grant and Diane quickly shifted the conversation toward legal documents connected to her late grandmother's trust fund. They pressured Nora to sign several forms, claiming everything needed to be handled immediately. Weak from medication and exhausted from recovery, she struggled to understand why they seemed more concerned about paperwork than her survival. Their behavior reopened old wounds. Growing up, Nora had always felt that her parents' affection came with conditions. Success earned praise. Obedience earned approval. Any disagreement brought criticism or distance. She had spent years trying to win the love that always seemed just out of reach. Now, lying injured in a hospital bed while her newborn fought to grow stronger in intensive care, she felt those childhood feelings returning. For the first time, Nora began to wonder whether the accident, the strange financial records, and her parents' sudden interest in the trust fund were pieces of the same disturbing puzzle. And the more she thought about it, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that the people closest to her were hiding something. The days that followed left Nora trapped between physical recovery and growing suspicion. Every conversation seemed to raise more questions than answers. Ryan remained distant, her parents appeared unusually anxious, and the investigation into the crash continued quietly in the background. Deep down, Nora sensed that something larger was unfolding around her, even if she could not yet see the full picture. One evening, after a difficult physical therapy session, she returned to her hospital room exhausted. Lily had spent a short time in her arms earlier that day, and the memory of her daughter's tiny fingers wrapped around hers was the only thing keeping her spirits alive. As she rested, she heard familiar voices approaching from the hallway. Her parents. The door was slightly open and they had not realized she was awake. At first, Nora paid little attention. Then she heard the tension in their voices. Grant sounded angry. Diane sounded frightened. Their argument grew louder with every sentence. What shocked Nora most was what she overheard next. Their refusal to take Lily home had never been about age, health, or inconvenience. They were afraid. Terrified, in fact. The arrival of Lily and Nora's growing interest in certain financial matters threatened secrets they had spent years protecting. Through fragments of their conversation, Nora learned enough to send a chill through her entire body. Her father had been involved in serious financial misconduct connected to the family construction business. Money had disappeared through hidden accounts for years. Meanwhile, Diane's long-concealed relationship with a powerful business associate had created connections that neither of them wanted exposed. Even worse, Ryan's name surfaced repeatedly during the argument. The three of them appeared linked by shared interests and mutual protection. Nora listened in stunned silence as the reality settled over her. The people she trusted most were not worried about her recovery. They were worried about themselves. They feared what she might discover. They feared what she might say. And they feared losing everything they had built through deception. When the argument finally ended and their footsteps faded down the corridor, Nora felt as though the ground beneath her had disappeared. Her injuries suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the emotional wound opening inside her. For years she had excused their behavior, believing they were simply difficult or overly controlling. Now she was forced to confront a far darker possibility. They had never truly protected her. They had protected their secrets. Tears filled her eyes as she looked toward the bassinet where Lily slept peacefully beside her bed. Her daughter had entered the world surrounded by betrayal before she had even taken her first breath. Nora carefully lifted Lily into her arms and held her close. The pain of discovering the truth was overwhelming, but another feeling was beginning to emerge beneath it. Determination. Whatever her parents were hiding, she would uncover it. Whatever dangers surrounded her family, she would face them. For Lily's sake, she could no longer afford to remain blind. As she kissed her daughter's forehead, Nora silently promised that the cycle of lies would end with her. Nora spent the next several days replaying everything she had overheard. The pieces still did not fit together completely, but the picture growing in her mind was deeply troubling. Her parents were hiding something significant. Ryan seemed increasingly nervous whenever the accident was mentioned, and every new detail pointed toward a web of deception that stretched back years. One quiet afternoon, while Lily slept nearby and rain tapped softly against the hospital window, an unexpected visitor appeared at her door. A frail elderly man stepped into the room. For a moment, Nora stared in disbelief. Grandpa. Walter Walt. Alice stood leaning on a cane, older and thinner than she remembered, but his sharp blue eyes were unchanged. She had not seen him in years. Her parents had gradually pushed him out of family gatherings, always claiming he was difficult, bitter, or confused. Eventually, contact had faded almost entirely. Yet now, when everyone else seemed to have an agenda, he was standing there. Nora felt tears forming as Walt slowly crossed the room. Without saying much, he sat beside her bed and gently took her hand. "I came as soon as I heard," he said softly. Those simple words carried more warmth than anything her parents had offered since the accident. For a while they talked about Lily, her recovery, and old memories from childhood. Then Walt's expression grew serious. "There are things you need to know," he said. Nora immediately sensed the weight behind his words. Walt revealed that he had spent years trying to warn people about Grant and Diane. He claimed documents had been altered, records had disappeared, and decisions surrounding Nora's late grandmother's estate had never been properly explained. Whenever he raised concerns, he was dismissed or pushed away. According to Walt, the isolation between them had not happened naturally. It had been intentional. He believed Grant and Diane wanted him removed because he knew too much. Then came the revelation that shook Nora the most. Walt admitted he had quietly investigated the circumstances surrounding the crash after hearing about the brake failure. Information shared by a trusted contact suggested the damage was unlikely to be accidental. Worse still, Ryan's name had surfaced during conversations connected to financial matters Nora had been examining before the accident. The room felt smaller with every sentence. The doubts she had been carrying suddenly felt terrifyingly real. As Walt continued speaking, years of confusion began falling into place. The pressure surrounding the trust fund, her parents' strange behavior, Ryan's evasiveness, and the accident itself no longer appeared unrelated. For the first time, Nora understood that the people closest to her might have been hiding the truth for years. And sitting beside her hospital bed was the only person willing to tell it. Walt's revelations lingered in Nora's mind long after he left the hospital that evening. Sleep became almost impossible. Every memory from her childhood seemed different now, viewed through a lens she had never possessed before. For years she had accepted her parents' explanations without question. Whenever disagreements arose between them and Walt, she had been told that her grandfather was stubborn, paranoid, and unwilling to let go of old grudges. Now she wondered whether those stories had been carefully crafted lies. The next morning, Walt returned carrying a small photo album. As they turned the pages together, Nora found herself revisiting moments she had nearly forgotten. There were pictures of fishing trips at a quiet lake, afternoons spent building birdhouses in Walt's garage, and birthday celebrations where he had been the only adult paying attention to what made her smile. Looking back, she realized something important. Walt had never expected anything from her. He had never demanded perfection. He had simply loved her. The contrast between those memories and her parents' behavior was painful. Grant and Diane had always measured affection against achievement. Good grades, good decisions, and obedience earned approval. Mistakes earned criticism. Their love had often felt conditional, while Walt's had never wavered. As the memories surfaced, so did the connections between recent events. The accident. The pressure over the trust fund. Their refusal to help Lily. Ryan's growing discomfort. Each piece pointed toward a larger effort to control her. The realization burned deeply. For the first time, Nora considered the possibility that she had been manipulated for years without recognizing it. Determined to learn more, she listened carefully as Walt described records he had quietly preserved over the decades. He explained that whenever he encountered documents that seemed suspicious, he made copies and stored them safely. Some involved property transfers. Others involved financial transactions connected to the family business. If the truth existed, evidence existed too. Over the following days, they began reviewing what Walt could access without attracting attention. The material was incomplete, but patterns quickly emerged. Certain dates matched unexplained decisions. Missing funds appeared alongside major business expansions. The deeper they looked, the harder it became to dismiss the possibility of deliberate wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Ryan's hospital visits became increasingly tense. Whenever Nora asked direct questions, he grew defensive. His smiles appeared forced and conversations ended quickly. More than once, she caught him studying her expression as if trying to determine how much she knew. Nora never revealed what Walt had told her. Instead, she remained calm and observant. Inside, however, her heartbreak was slowly transforming into resolve. Someone had nearly taken her life. Someone had tried to leave Lily without a mother. And if the people responsible believed she would remain weak and silent, they were making a serious mistake. For the first time since the crash, Nora stopped thinking only about recovery. She started thinking about justice. As the weeks passed, Nora's strength steadily returned. She graduated from short walks around her hospital floor to longer sessions with physical therapists. Every small milestone felt meaningful not only because she was healing, but because she knew she would soon need the strength to face difficult battles ahead. Walt remained her quiet ally. One afternoon he arrived carrying a sealed envelope and a key attached to a faded tag. He explained that years earlier he had rented a safe deposit box after becoming concerned about certain transactions and legal disputes within the family. He had kept its existence secret from everyone. The contents, he believed, could answer questions that had remained buried for far too long. After being discharged from the hospital, Nora arranged for trusted legal assistants to retrieve the materials. Inside were decades of carefully preserved records. There were handwritten notes, correspondence between business associates, bank statements, and documents that revealed hidden financial relationships operating behind the scenes. The information painted a troubling picture. Money had moved through layers of accounts before reaching destinations that never appeared on official reports. Several signatures raised immediate concerns among professionals reviewing the files. What once looked like isolated irregularities now appeared connected. At the same time, another unexpected shift occurred within the family. Her younger brother, Seth, reached out. Unlike their parents, Seth seemed genuinely conflicted. He had spent years believing the version of events he had been told. Yet recent developments had begun raising doubts. After a private conversation with Walt, he started asking questions of his own. Their first meeting was awkward. Both carried years of distance and misunderstanding. But as they spoke, Nora realized Seth was struggling with the same painful discovery she had faced. The possibility that much of what they believed about their family was untrue. Then came a revelation that shook her deeply. Among recently uncovered communications were discussions about Lily's future. Rather than showing concern for the child's well-being, the messages focused on removing obstacles and limiting Nora's influence over important financial matters. Reading those words left Nora speechless. For a long time she sat quietly holding her daughter while processing what she had learned. The sadness remained, but it no longer controlled her. Something stronger had taken its place. Clarity. She understood exactly what was at stake. This was no longer only about past wrongdoing or hidden money. It was about protecting Lily from becoming entangled in the same toxic patterns that had damaged generations before her. As evening sunlight filled the room, Nora looked down at her sleeping daughter and made a silent promise. Whatever happened next, she would build a different future. One based on truth instead of manipulation. And she would not back down. Once Nora settled into her temporary apartment with Lily, her focus shifted from gathering information to organizing it. Boxes of records, digital files, and handwritten notes covered her dining table. What had once seemed overwhelming slowly became manageable as she created timelines, matched transactions, and identified patterns hidden beneath years of paperwork. Her background in accounting suddenly became one of her greatest advantages. Skills that had often been dismissed by others now allowed her to spot discrepancies that experienced professionals might overlook. She spent late nights comparing figures, tracing transfers, and building detailed summaries that transformed scattered evidence into a coherent picture. The more she uncovered, the more certain she became that several individuals had relied on the assumption that nobody would ever connect the dots. They had underestimated her. Walt continued helping whenever his health allowed. Although his energy faded quickly, his determination never did. He reviewed documents, clarified old events, and pointed her toward details that seemed insignificant at first glance but later proved valuable. Together they assembled a case far stronger than either could have created alone. Meanwhile, pressure began building elsewhere. Nora noticed subtle changes in the behavior of those around her. Phone calls went unanswered. Meetings were cancelled unexpectedly. Certain people who had once acted confidently now appeared nervous whenever her name surfaced. Word was spreading that she was asking questions. One evening, an opportunity presented itself. During a carefully arranged conversation, Ryan made several statements that contradicted previous explanations he had given about events surrounding the period before the crash. Believing the discussion was private, he became increasingly careless with his words. His attempt to justify certain decisions only created new inconsistencies. For Nora, the exchange confirmed something important. People who rely on deception often struggle to keep their stories aligned. The cracks were beginning to show. At the same time, emotions inside the family reached a breaking point. Diane requested a meeting, insisting she wanted peace and understanding. Instead, the conversation quickly turned hostile. Frustration replaced diplomacy as years of resentment surfaced. At one point, Diane accused Nora of destroying relationships and creating unnecessary conflict. The accusation no longer had the effect it once would have. Nora listened calmly. She no longer felt the need to defend herself against narratives designed to silence her. When the meeting ended, she walked away with a sense of confidence she had not felt in years. The fear that once dominated her decisions had disappeared. In its place stood conviction. Back at home, Lily began crying from her crib. Nora lifted her daughter into her arms and gently rocked her until she settled. As she looked into those small, trusting eyes, she understood exactly why she had refused to stop. This fight was no longer about proving herself right. It was about ensuring that truth prevailed where lies had ruled for far too long. And for the first time she could see the finish line ahead. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning. It came from Grant and Diane through their attorney and was presented as an opportunity to repair the family's fractured relationships. The letter spoke of understanding, forgiveness, and moving forward together. To an outsider it sounded sincere. Nora immediately recognized it for what it was. A last attempt to regain control of a situation that was slipping away. The meeting was scheduled at the family home, a place filled with memories she once treasured. As she prepared to attend, she felt surprisingly calm. Months earlier, the thought of confronting everyone under one roof would have terrified her. Now she felt ready. When she arrived, several relatives were already present. Aunts, uncles, and cousins had been invited under the impression that a long-standing family dispute was finally being resolved. Conversations filled the house, but beneath the polite smiles, tension lingered in the air. Grant took charge almost immediately. He spoke confidently, presenting himself as a father trying to reunite his family. Diane added emotional appeals, portraying recent conflicts as misunderstandings that had grown out of proportion. Together they attempted to shape the narrative before Nora had the chance to speak. For a while she allowed them to continue. Then she stood. The room gradually fell silent. Without raising her voice, Nora began addressing specific events, dates, and decisions. She carefully explained how certain claims made throughout the past months conflicted with documented facts. Whenever someone challenged her statements, she responded with records that supported her position. The atmosphere changed quickly. Questions started coming from relatives who had previously remained neutral. Confusion turned into concern. Concern turned into disbelief. As more information surfaced, the confidence Grant and Diane had displayed earlier began to fade. Attempts to interrupt failed. Attempts to redirect the conversation failed. Attempts to dismiss the evidence failed. For the first time they could not control what others were hearing. Then the situation escalated even further. Investigators who had been conducting their own review arrived to follow up on information recently submitted through proper legal channels. Their appearance transformed what had been intended as a private family gathering into something entirely different. Shock spread throughout the room. Some relatives stepped back in stunned silence. Others demanded answers. The carefully maintained image that had protected certain people for years collapsed under scrutiny. Ryan, who had arrived expecting support, found himself facing questions he could no longer avoid. The confidence he once relied upon disappeared as events unfolded around him. Nora watched quietly. There was no satisfaction in seeing chaos consume the room. Only relief. The burden she had carried for so long was finally leaving her shoulders. As voices echoed through the house and difficult truths came into the open, she realized something important. The outcome was no longer in her hands. She had done what she came to do. She had spoken the truth. Now the truth could speak for itself. The weeks after the gathering brought changes that spread far beyond the walls of a single home. News of the investigation traveled quickly through professional circles, community organizations, and business networks. People who had once been eager to associate themselves with Grant and Diane suddenly became cautious. Long-standing partnerships dissolved. Projects were suspended. Conversations that once opened doors now ended with polite refusals. For years, reputation had been one of their most valuable assets. Watching that reputation erode proved far more damaging than either of them had anticipated. Meanwhile, independent reviews of financial records continued. Regulatory agencies, legal representatives, and corporate stakeholders became involved. Decisions that had once been made behind closed doors were now examined openly. As the process unfolded, control shifted into new hands. Boards demanded accountability. Investors sought transparency. Individuals who had remained silent in the past began sharing information of their own. The consequences expanded steadily. For Nora, however, the most meaningful victories were personal rather than financial. Her relationship with Seth grew stronger with each passing week. Without the pressure of competing loyalties, they finally began speaking honestly about their childhood experiences. They discovered that many of the same events had affected them differently, creating misunderstandings that lasted for years. Those conversations did not erase the past, but they created a foundation for a healthier future. Walt remained by Nora's side whenever his strength allowed. His health continued declining, and some days even simple conversations exhausted him. Yet his spirit never weakened. One afternoon, while sitting together on a park bench overlooking a small pond, he watched Lily sleeping peacefully in her stroller. A smile crossed his face. "You broke the cycle," he said quietly. The words stayed with Nora long after the visit ended. For so much of her life, she had focused on surviving expectations, disappointments, and manipulation. Now she understood that her greatest achievement was not exposing wrongdoing. It was choosing a different path. Legal matters eventually settled, bringing clarity to questions that had lingered for years. Assets were redistributed according to verified records, and safeguards were established to protect what rightfully belonged to future generations. With those issues finally resolved, Nora made another important decision. She updated official documents for herself and Lily, choosing a new chapter that reflected the life they were building rather than the history they were leaving behind. The change was symbolic but deeply meaningful. It represented freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom from old obligations. Freedom from the belief that family loyalty required endless sacrifice. As autumn arrived, Nora stood outside her home watching leaves drift across the yard while Lily laughed nearby. For the first time in a very long time, there were no urgent calls, no hidden agendas, and no battles demanding her attention. Only peace. The kind of peace that comes after enduring a storm and discovering that, despite everything, you are still standing. A year later, life looked nothing like it had before. Nora and Lily had settled into a quiet town where nobody knew their history. Their small house sat at the end of a peaceful street lined with trees and flower gardens. The pace of life felt slower there, and for the first time in years, Nora welcomed the simplicity. Her mornings began with routines she once took for granted. Breakfast in a sunny kitchen. Walks through the neighborhood. Even ordinary moments carried a sense of gratitude because she understood how close she had come to losing everything. Lily was thriving. The tiny infant who had once fought through uncertain days had grown into a curious, energetic child with a bright smile and endless questions. Watching her discover the world became Nora's greatest source of happiness. Despite the progress she had made, one person remained at the center of her thoughts. Walt. His health had continued to decline, and Nora spent as much time with him as possible. Some visits were filled with stories and laughter. Others were quiet, with neither feeling the need to say much. Their bond no longer required explanations. One evening, as golden sunlight filtered through the window of his room, Walt asked to see recent photographs of Lily. Nora showed him dozens. He studied each one carefully. The smile on his face seemed to say everything words could not. They talked for hours about family history, old memories, mistakes, lessons, and second chances. There was sadness in knowing their time together was limited, but there was also comfort. Nothing important had been left unsaid. A few days later, Walt passed away peacefully. The loss was profound. For a long time, Nora struggled to imagine a world without his guidance. Yet even in grief, she felt thankful. He had given her something priceless, the courage to trust herself when the truth seemed impossible to face. As the seasons changed once more, Nora planted a small garden behind her home. It became her favorite place to reflect. On warm afternoons, she would sit nearby while Lily played among the flowers, laughing as butterflies drifted through the air. Those quiet moments reminded her how far they had come. The hardships of the past would always remain part of her story, but they no longer defined her future. Standing beneath the afternoon sun, Nora watched her daughter run across the grass and felt a deep sense of contentment. The road that brought them here had been painful and unpredictable. Yet it had led them somewhere worth reaching. A life built on honesty, resilience, and love. And for the first time, the future felt wide open. What would you have done in Nora's place? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories.